Insomniac, a very talented game developer company that just released its long-awaited sequel to the critically acclaimed Spider-Man game. They're also responsible for creating one of the most iconic video game characters of all time, Spyro the Dragon, before they sold the rights to that character off to... However, their longest standing IP happens to be Ratchet and Clank. If you've never heard of it, imagine Super Mario Galaxy, but Mario's wielding the wackiest and weirdest guns you've ever seen. This is Ratchet and Clank. This series has been around since the PlayStation 2 and is technically legally old enough to drink in the United States. How about that? If we don't count the PS2 re-releases, or the spin-off game, or the other spin-off game, there's technically 4 main games that came out for the system that make up the Future Saga. But you know what? I don't hear many people talk about these games. And it's probably because you can't easily play them. Unless you want to buy a 17-year-old console for the price of what the fuck? Or you want to pay for the highest level of PlayStation Plus for the price of what the fuck? Yeah, what the hell? Okay, maybe there's a reason why these games never got ported outside the PS3. Let's go through them to find out. The first game, Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction, came out in 2007. If you've never played a Ratchet & Clank game, just know this. That guy's Ratchet, that guy's Clank. Get it? Got it? Good. The game wastes no time getting right to the action and encouraging the players to use their weapons available to them. By default, Ratchet carries his trusty Omni Wrench, which is great for beatdowns. It can also be thrown like a boomerang. Weapon-wise, he also starts with a gun that shoots fire bullets and,
bombs?
After meeting the big bad evil guy of the game, you steal his ship, crash land it, and do some favors for this smuggler guy who you'll see a lot of in this series. He drops you off on a planet where you get to find and repair your own spaceship, which allows you to move around the galaxy and do all sorts of stuff. Along the way, you buy new weapons, get new gadgets, obtain new armor, and explore so many different planets. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's take a look at what this series is best known for, its funky ass weapons. Sure, this game has its own versions of standard everyday weapons like a flamethrower and a rocket launcher. But what if you wanted a swarm of nanobots to annihilate your enemies? Or a bomb that makes everybody in its radius dance like there's no tomorrow? Or what about explosive shards? Or a lightning whip? Or lock-on rockets? Or a little companion with a big attitude and a bigger mouth?
I shall let you live, little heathen. Psych, Mr. Zircon lives only to kill.
Yeah, this game has all of that and more. And there's 2 ways of upgrading these weapons. 1, gather a material called raritanium to upgrade specific aspects of the weapon. 2, use the weapons. Literally. The more you use it, the more it'll evolve until it reaches max level, in which it evolves into a new and improved form. Moving on to the story of this game, it's okay. It does a great job at providing clues for both Ratchet's and Clank's past, which hadn't really been explored in the series up until now. However, the story moves at such a breakneck pace and doesn't give a lot of time for inflection, to the point where something important would occur, and then I'd blink for a moment, and then I'd be like, wait, what just happened? It is not a super long game by any means. It takes on average about 12.5 hours to complete, and they really could have lengthened some of the cutscenes and stuff to make it feel like you're not racing to the next part. But overall, Tools of Destruction is a pretty solid game. For Insomniac's second PS3 game, and the first Ratchet & Clank game in high definition, I'd say they were clearly cooking. The game that followed it is titled Ratchet & Clank Future Quest for Booty. You laughed at that title, didn't you? You at least snickered, right? Well, I'll have you know this title is tame compared to some of the other titles in the series. How about the second and third PS2 games titled Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal? Or how about the first PSP spin-off titled Size Matters? These games are supposed to be for kids, y'all. But anyways, the other thing to note about this game is that it's short. Like, really short. Like, you can finish it in 2 to 3 hours kind of short. And because the game is so short, it only brings back a handful of weapons from the previous game's roster, with most of them already like halfway to max upgrade level. They could have technically kept all the mechanics the same, but they did add at least 2 new mechanics to the game that we would eventually see in the next big boy sequel game. They added the ability for Ratchet to pick up objects with his Omni Wrench to hold, and they also added the ability for Ratchet to set gizmos with his Omni Wrench, such as catapults and springs. And these mechanics would show up in one form or another in the game that would follow. Again though, this game is super short, and even though it doesn't add much to the overall story, it doesn't hurt to at least play it if you just happen to have it. Although there is one problem. This game never got a physical release outside of North America, meaning the only way to play it in those regions is through the PS3 digital storefront. But when that goes down, yeah, there goes one of the ways of playing it. Next up is Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time. Yeah, it's a mouthful. This was intended to be a real deal full sequel to the previous two games, and I'm happy to say it most certainly is. Insomniac went above and beyond for this game with how they introduced new weapons alongside returning old ones. They revamped space travel and added new moons for Ratchet to explore, and it even had a really cool story that actually felt like it had room to breathe. This wasn't just a sequel, this was the sequel. First, let's talk about the weapons. They actually replaced the default gun and bomb launcher with special versions that make use of customizations that you can find scattered throughout the game. And they even introduced a shotgun that can also be customized with these things. But you want to know about the funny weapons, don't you? Well, how about a Sonic Eruptor, which is essentially a frog-like creature attached to a shotgun? Yep, that exists. Or how about a Freeze Bomb, or electric zappy spikes, or a buzzsaw boomerang, or a sniper laser rifle that kinda sucks, or
a demonic portal that summons an eldritch being that devours the souls of your enemies.
ha 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 ha. Sorry. You can also upgrade your spaceship with new weapons and abilities based on how many Zoni you collect, which you can primarily find around the main planets and the various moons that Ratchet can visit. And just like in Tools of Destruction, there's also an arena level where you can battle waves of enemies with various scenarios to earn all sorts of prizes. Clank also has his very own gameplay mechanics, which mainly revolve around solving puzzles. And some of the puzzle mechanics are really cool. But I wish they showed up more than once. It honestly feels like a waste. But overall, this game is solid. Super solid. And this technically would be the end of the saga, if not for one more game. Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus. Yeah, they kinda dropped the future part from the title, which I guess makes sense as it could have gotten confusing as to whether the future games were actually part of the main series, because they technically are. But now it's hard to tell whether Into the Nexus is part of the future saga or not, which I mean it technically is, but it isn't. I guess we can't really win here, can we? Into the Nexus serves as more of an epilogue to the saga, as it introduces a new storyline, but also makes you think back on what happened over the past 3 games. Also, for a PS3 game, it looks absolutely gorgeous. Oddly enough, this game actually released around the same time the PlayStation 4 first came out, so you would think they would have ported over to that system as well, but I guess not. And despite it technically only being about half the length of a typical Ratchet & Clank game, it genuinely feels like a full-on sequel game. There's new weapons, a new UI, new mechanics like the jetpack, and much more. And yes, I did say new weapons. How about a quantum blaster that shoots waves at enemies, or a revolving rocket launcher, or a beam cannon that turns enemies into snowmen and is ironically the best weapon in the entire game. Like, holy crap, this thing drains boss health like nobody's business. The only major gripe I have with this game is that right when it starts to feel like it's picking up steam, it ends. Not super abruptly, but quickly enough to make you go like, oh, it's over. Okay, I guess. Other than that, this game is phenomenal in so many ways. It introduces some really cool gameplay mechanics for both Ratchet and Clank that really leaves you wanting more of it. It feels like a common trend in these games to invent some really cool gameplay mechanics, but then only use them a few times in only one game. I don't know, I don't work at Insomniac, but I'm sure they have their reasons. And that concludes the Future Saga and its story, until Rift Apart would pick up where the story left off on the PS5. But that is another game for another day and another video. The real question we should be asking here is, why are these games so hard to play? These are genuinely amazing games with like the only downside of half of them being too short. Why haven't they been ported to PS5 or PC or both? Why must they be stuck behind such expensive methods to play, especially when one of them will be even harder to play when the PS3 storefront goes down? And the worst part is that while PS3 emulation has made headway, it's still gonna be a long ways to go before these games run smoothly. I played all 4 games through emulation with my legally obtained copies, mind you, and each game had its own issues of crashing and frame dropping that I just had to put up with. But unfortunately, this is what we have to work with. The Ratchet & Clank Future Saga is genuinely one of the best quadrilogies you may never play unless you want to cough up a good sum of money. But it just goes to show that even before they were widely known for the Spider-Man game, Insomniac was still pumping out quality titles, and still is. And the Ratchet & Clank series is absolute proof of that. Now the movie, on the other hand, let's just focus on the games.